Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you this evening about Africa's next generation. I'm Wisdom Tettey, and I'm Dean of the Irving K. Barber School of Arts and Sciences on UBC's Okanagan campus. My focus this evening is on African higher education. And I'm looking at the extent to which these educational institutions are able to harness the demographic dividend that is expected to result from the youthful population that Africa has. And there's a positive orientation to the role of Africans' youth in fostering progress, both politically and otherwise. But I also want to challenge our thoughts on the extent to which our higher educational institutions are capable of delivering on this promise to its youth. So I want to give you a context for the challenges that African youth face as beneficiaries of the higher educational institutions. But I want to zero in specifically on academic staff capacity and the challenges of regenerating the African academy. Because it seems to me that if African institutions are going to be a catalyst for socioeconomic growth and innovation on the continent, that it needs to be able to, those institutions need to be able to build their own capacity in order to be able to extend the benefits of capacity building to other sectors of society. So I'll explore some of the efforts that are being made to address the challenges that African institutions have to contend with. And I'll look at what else we could be doing to enable those institutions be the forerunners for social prosperity that people talk about. So it's interesting to note that Africa has the highest number of people under the age of 20 in comparison to any other region of the world. About 65% of its citizens are below the age of 35. This is both an asset and a challenge for higher educational institutions. To reap the demographic dividend, the continent has to address a tripod of issues that confront higher education. This includes questions of access, questions of higher quality education in terms of teaching, learning, and scholarship, and their relevance as catalysts for innovation and socioeconomic development. So the question is there institutional capacity to deliver on these promises? And I'll share with you some data that suggests that in 1991, there were about 2.7 million Africans in universities. The estimate for 2015 is close to 20 million. So obviously there's increasing demand for higher education, but that is not matched by existing capacity. While enrollment rates are at about 7 to 8% compared to a global average of 27 to 30%, institutions still find it difficult to provide high quality, globally competitive educational experiences for many prospective students. Inability to meet demand is due to several factors that I wouldn't elaborate on, but certainly would be willing to have a conversation about later on. But you've got issues around inadequate infrastructure, got incommensurate staff capacity, and funding challenges. Now, those who get into these institutions have to contend with other constraints as well. There are high student-faculty ratios. There's low quality and perceived irrelevance of the curriculum in setting context. And there is limited opportunity for innovative scholarship. And when I say these things, I'm trying to paint a broad brush, but I want folks to understand that these are complex issues, and certainly my 7 minutes would not allow me to elaborate on that. And so I don't want people to get the impression that somehow these are homogenized realities, right? There's complexity, there's diversity. But by and large, this is the picture. And last year, when African leaders met in Senegal to engage with this question about the capacity of higher education institutions to deliver, there was no question about the fact that everybody acknowledges a shortage of capacity. And so when I talk about this, without diminishing strides in other areas, I just want folks to understand that this is a reality that we need to contend with. So I want to pack this issue about access and quality education for a minute and return to the question of staff capacity, because without addressing that issue, some of the things that I've talked about, we're not going to be in a position to address. I want to focus mainly on staff capacity and its implication for scholarship and learning, and the capacity of universities to provide the needed human resources for these societies. And the question is, why are these countries in this state? It's instructive to note that R&D investment in Africa is at about 1.3% of global investment in R&D. The faculty members in these institutions contend with low remuneration relative to other areas, and so we see a brain drain, not just globally, but also internally to other areas where remuneration is better. And these results in huge faculty-student ratios that have implications for quality education and so on. The other interesting thing to keep in mind is certainly if you're going to build capacity, your graduate programs have to be strong. You've got to attract a lot of people into them and be able to sustain their work so that they can come out and become regenerators of the economy. The evidence suggests that in Africa, we're seeing a dwindling of people registering in graduate programs because the benefits of being an academic are not as great as they might be in other areas. We also know that as a result of this, Africa's contribution to global production in scholarship is very minimal. It's at about 1% of global production. And certainly no doubt that patents are just about 0.1% of the global number. So what are we doing about these things? And I just want to touch on four main things and to wrap it up. One is strengthening graduate programs is key. And there's work being done in this area. The Carnegie Foundation, Carnegie Corporation has been very instrumental in supporting the Next Generations project. We're also seeing a strengthening of research networks across the continent. And so you've got centers of excellence that are being established to support and build networks of scholarship because none of these countries or institutions on their own are capable of generating the capacity to do that. The African diaspora is a huge part of the plan to mobilize the diaspora in a way that allows them to turn brain drain into brain circulation in a way that goes back to fertilize the academic environment in their places of origin. And there's a 10-10 initiative that was just started last year, which is meant to bring in about 10,000 African diaspora and African academics over the next 10 years to support and help collaborative research and so on. And of course, we heard about the MasterCard Foundation, which is doing its part to support folks. So there's really a lot going on to support Africa, but it seems to me that we have to look at how we might integrate all of these efforts in a way that is coordinated and put the onus on African governments to do their part. But all of us as global citizens need to move beyond the rhetoric of supporting these initiatives and making sure that there's a reality that involves working collaboratively with Africans, not necessarily taking them out of Africa to train them, but building capacity at home, which will provide the most foundation necessary for Africa to define its own future. Thank you very much.